of intros. So again, thank you all so much for joining. This month's guest speaker is Paul Quitoriano, and he will be sharing a little bit of insight on the foundations of photography, particularly when it comes to photographing food. Paul is a portrait and still life photographer based in New York City. He has worked with a lot of really well-known and great publications across the country. So we are very honored and grateful that he is spending a few minutes with us today. So Paul, I'm going to hand it over to you, both the call and the presenter privileges on GoToMeeting. But if you don't mind getting started by just sharing a little bit more about yourself and your background, that would be amazing.
All right, sounds good. Let's see if I can start sharing my screen. Great. So quick about me, I'm gonna scroll through some of my work. As mentioned before, I'm a photographer based out of New York City, and I've been working with food and portraits and chefs alike for the past 10 years. Just to get an idea of kind of what I've been up to. And a representation of kind of the photography I've been doing the past couple of years. And what's funny about a lot of this stuff is what you're seeing is a lot of my own lunches after photographing a lot of these shoots. So I'm going to get into more details about kind of how I go about doing these assignments and kind of how to start visualizing your own food. So first up, we'll talk about composition. And there are a few angles that you can definitely take advantage of based on what kind of food you're photographing. A lot of things that you'll be seeing these days are kind of this top-down, three-quarters kind of photography that has like these big, fleshed out kind of cinematic stories to try to tell a story without actually having people in the images. Like for example, this is a photo of like a brewery, and to kind of give off an example of what they do, we kind of try to photograph as many things as possible and show off like all of their beers, and without actually showing people pouring beers. Another example of composition is using layers to kind of tell a story. So in this photo here, you can see on the right, there's like a big, kind of a tall beer that kind of leads into this beautiful coleslaw that leads into this veggie burger. And in the background, you kind of get a sense of place. So the idea of thinking about your environments that you're in. And I'll actually show you a photo that I took with my phone to kind of level out the playing field. Here's a photograph of a slice of pizza from one of my favorite pizza joints in Brooklyn. And it kind of has the air of showing what kind of place this is based on just like the crazy, elaborate, very messy table setting. And then a photograph of one of my other lunches in a cleaner environment. And the idea is to kind of just showcase color and different kinds of textures. I want to jump into light. So this is the most important part of all your photos. Once you get styling kind of in your brain. So this is an example of bad light. So this is a photograph by an amazing chef, Martha Stewart, but she's not necessarily a good photographer. The mistake she made here was she had fired the flash from your camera directly onto the food, and what it does is it erases all the depth. And this, I'm not going to leave this on the screen for too much longer because it's kind of pukey. And this is an example of me doing the same thing. Like you lose all of your textures and all of your shadows, and it just becomes kind of like a muddy, less contrasty mess. And everything I will show you from here on out is all different types of available light. So this is just nice morning light. Again, just more morning light. Examples of like top down, everything here is shot without a flash and just using a window. You're going to run into scenarios where it's just too dark to use a window, like if you're shooting, let's say, at nighttime. And if you're doing it, especially with your phone, the one workaround is to actually use a friend's flashlight, which I've done many times on their phones, just to give the light a direction and to kind of overpower whatever overhead lights that might be in whatever area you're in. So if you can pay attention in this photograph to where the light is coming from, it's kind of from behind that glass, and it adds just a nice shape of a shadow just to give things a little more contrast and have things kind of pop off. So like this definitely was taken at night with just a light from someone else shining in from the left side. Examples of two different kinds of lights. So this is an example of hard light. So this was taken just directly with the sun shining through a window here. And then eventually I got a little bit of cloud coverage, and you get stuff like this. So if you notice the shadows get a little softer, and kind of based on what kind of textures you're trying to show off, you would go with a hard versus soft. Like a hard light gets you a lot more texture if you just look at how like crumbly and crunchy that cheese looks versus softer foods like this gnocchi. Other examples, just soft window light, and think about using the environmental props to kind of lead the eye into the photograph. In the bottom right here, there's this, it's like a plant that the restaurants kind of have on all the tables that kind of lead your eye into this, it's like a clam paella dish. Other examples of hard light. So this is a photo I took 15 minutes before this webinar started, and it's of a very underwhelming salad I had in my fridge. And this photograph has all of the lights in my apartment on, as well as the window light. And if you can just look kind of closely, how it kind of looks muddy and shadowless, and it just doesn't have kind of the appeal that you would want. So you always want to use like one light. So this is after turning off the overhead. You can kind of see how purple the lettuce is and how green the lettuces are. And this is all just taken with a phone next to a big bright window. And this is the proof. That's the setup for that shot. It's just a big old window, a lot of plants, and a scary mannequin that should go away. All right, we're gonna jump into photographing people. So photographing people is pretty hard, especially in food. You generally don't want to photograph people eating because there's no real way to have an attractive open mouth food chewing shot. So to kind of get around showing photos of food and still trying to tell the story, I kind of focus in on details. And this is definitely something to think about if you want to show a full story, if you can photograph your food in the process of it being made. So this is a photograph of the gnocchi being made that you saw from the previous slides. So just like interesting details, just to kind of like get the story across. And if you do have to photograph a person, I think the best way to go about it is to have them directly engaged with you. So this is Jason Wu. He's a dress designer out here in New York. And in this photograph, he's just looking right at me. His mouth is not open. That food is nowhere near going into his mouth because there's just, it's very, very tough to get appealing food shot. Just think about what it looks like when you eat, or like the idea of, have you ever tried to take a picture and you didn't realize the phone was on selfie mode and you like see your face just for that quick second? It kind of feels like that's a challenge that I come across when being asked to photograph people in the middle of eating. Here's an example of a small example of someone with all the food, but not necessarily like eating it, just not engaged. You definitely should stay away from putting food or photographing people putting food into their own mouths. Other ways to tell stories about dishes you made is just very graphic finished plates. So this kind of tells you everything you need to know. If you see a before and after, like this is the plated version of the gnocchi. If you saw the before and the after, you can tell that, you know, the food was enjoyed and it was eaten. And same goes for this this like pulled pork dish. Let's go back into light for a quick second. So in all these photos, you'll notice that, or maybe you won't notice, but all the light is coming from one direction. So if I haven't said it a million times by now, you definitely want to get to a window. And if you can, turn off any overhead lights, because you're going to want to make sure that the overhead lights don't mix color temperatures with your outside window light, because the sun is the most beautiful light you can ever get. So this is all just one light. Starting this photo, it starts from the upper right, and you're kind of at the mercy of where your window's facing and where your sun is coming from if you're shooting during the day. So this is the example of the nighttime one. Just make sure it's coming from the left or the right. You want to avoid shooting from the bottom of the frame, because it sometimes will create unappealing shadows, and it's technically called monster light. So that gives you an idea of what that all means. So just notice it's coming from the upper left, streaming all the way down. You want to keep one direction. That's what's going to give you the contrast and the textures of all the dishes that you're making. Yeah, everything just one direction. Same thing here. It's coming just from the right, from over there. Let's see if I missed anything. Oh, composition. So the three kinds of composition we have are the overhead, which is good for showing a ton of texture from the top, where you generally don't look at your food like this. Like no one kind of hovers over their food, at least they didn't used to hover over their food. So being able to show off kind of what you're doing, but some foods do not lend themselves to this kind of photography. So for example, like sandwiches and burgers. So if you'll notice, most sandwiches and burgers I have here are all shot from like a profile angle, just to show the layers. It seems obvious, but I have run into seeing photos of just the tops of sandwiches where you just see like a bun and that's it. Another example. So those are the kinds of angles you're trying to go for, just to show off what is going on your plates. Make sure to check out various proppings to kind of tell the story too. Like this is a little redundant because you can definitely tell these are Asian dumplings, but the client here specifically asked that I had chopsticks in it just to really drive that home. Yeah. Sorry to jump around so much. All right, that's pretty much all the basics that I wanted to cover before getting into your questions. So I'm going to switch off this and you can actually see me now. All right. So I have a question from Kelly M. With the trick of using a friend's flash, work in a commercial kitchen with artificial lighting, or is that used only in darker lighting? It depends on how close you can get that light, because you're right, the whole idea of using the friend's flash trick is to get it as close as possible to overpower everything else. So in that scenario, if you had a way of getting the food into any kind of shade or shadow in that kitchen, which may or may not exist, the only way to kind of get it to work correctly is to, yes, shine the light from essentially 45 degrees, and depending on how strong their flashlights are.
Awesome. Thank you, Paul. Just an FYI, it looks like we, at least on my end, can't see you, so you may have shut off your webcam.
I'm back.
But no worries. But another quick question, and I know I think I kind of sent this over when we were going back and forth on today's call, but are there any specific things that you take into consideration or that you look for when you are photographing food? I think you've shared quite a bit already, but if you don't mind going through maybe some of your thought process when you have a new client you're working with or a new food shoot that you have to do.
Sure. You kind of want to see how you're trying to tell the story. Like, is the story about the food itself, or is it about the place? So on some of the slides you've seen that I have photos of food where it's just a plain white backdrop with just the dish, and that's more about highlighting the dish versus some of the other foods where you can see the entire environment. And my thought process there is like, how do I show both where and what everyone's eating in kind of a cohesive manner without one being more overpowering than the other?
Gotcha. And do you kind of take the same approach when thinking about photographing people or taking candid shots? I think that's another big thing for our campus kitchen students is, oftentimes they're at community-based organizations where they're serving food to, whether it be seniors or a group of kids or families. And we often see shots of the entire group or kind of shots from afar. But I think, oftentimes a photo tells a little bit more of a story if it's a little bit more of a close-up shot. So any tips or tricks there?
Yeah, definitely. As I rated before, like, you want to stay away from having people put food into their mouths. Them interacting with it, holding it, even just like cutting it or putting things on forks and knives, just organizing bites would definitely help you in those situations. I'm trying to think of one good photo I have of someone physically eating food, and nothing really pops out unless they're like directly engaged with you and they're very aware that they're being photographed. Because it's funny, I'm pretty sure no one knows what they look like while they're eating it. It is not very appetizing.
Yeah, I'm sure it's hard to look flattering when you're putting food in your mouth. Yeah. Cool. And I think one of the other questions I sent you over is some of our prepared questions. And folks, just a reminder, if you would rather send your questions via the chat box, please feel free. They can be, broad questions or very specific questions on Paul's experience or his insight into photography. But another one of the prepared questions that we sent over to you, Paul, was, how can students who maybe are not professional photographers, maybe aren't that keen into photography, how can they get over some of their nerves of, potentially asking clients if they can take a photo of them, or taking close-ups of people talking to each other or enjoying their meals or anything like that?
A lot of that has to do with building a rapport with your subject or who you want to photograph. It's very off-putting, and it's definitely scary for you if you're just going to try to photograph a person without them knowing. So a lot of times it's easy to just try to get to know them and warm them up, where if they do spot you photographing them, they don't kind of get weird and freak out, but they might actually have a genuine reaction to you, which is exactly what you want. In terms of photographing people from far away, that can kind of help to get genuine kind of reactions, because that's what you're looking for, is a genuine reaction. But thinking of layering things in between what you're trying to see with other people. So in the photograph I had of the like the hamburger, I had a beer like here, and I had something else here. So what it does, it leads your eye to that person, and also gives you that disconnect where they can't really see what you're up to.
Gotcha. Thank you. And it looks like we have another question in the chat box. What's your recommendation for a budget-friendly starter camera? Our team might purchase a camera soon.
I would look into the Canon T3s. You definitely want a digital SLR from either Canon or Nikon. Those are the best companies out there that have just very accessible equipment. And the budget for that should be anywhere between like $700 to $1,000. I'm not too keen on the budget-friendly starter cameras, but they're usually around that level. And those will come with a general lens kit, and eventually as you take photos, you'll wish your lens could do a little bit more, and that's when you'll decide kind of what your next purchase is going to be. Because right now I have actually it's right here. I have one camera with a regular lens and one camera with a close-up lens, and these are the two things that I use most often when trying to build like larger shots and when trying to zero in on specific textures or things I'm trying to show off.
Okay. Are there any questions from anyone on the phone or on the webinar?
I'm seeing a question from Nelda about canned food. That's kind of a tricky one because that's more of a still life question, but the same rules apply. Think about one directional light. If they're canned foods, I would do it definitely from the left to the right. You don't want to shine a light in the front because I'm going to guess they would have like a reflective sticker or a reflective kind of label. Very like Andy Warhol, I think is what you're asking.
Thanks for catching that, Nelda. Sorry for missing your question. Any other questions on the line?
I missed it.
I don't think I see anything coming in, but Paul, I know one kind of question on my mind as we've chatted and as we were preparing to have you on today was just a little bit about your personal background and really kind of what got you interested in photography and what made you decide to take this path as a career. So I'd love to hear more about that if you don't mind.
Sure. I'm originally from San Francisco, California, and I studied photography at San Francisco State. I moved to New York after I graduated and immediately started working for newspapers. I was doing beat coverage for like the New York Times and the Village Voice and the Wall Street Journal, which was just vague news assignments covering parades and like protests and things like that. And one day they asked me if I could shoot a restaurant food review, and I had never actually done that before. The Wall Street Journal sent me to photograph, I'm pretty sure it was the hot dogs. And after I did that assignment, they were just like, this is what you do now. This is the only thing you should do. So I think I kind of nailed it on that. and I've been trying to just tell, I was very much in the realm of wanting to be a documentary, like war photographer, but the food world and the food culture is also super important. And there are ways to tell stories through food versus just being like vanity shots of just like pretty plates.
Awesome. And with that, do you think there's been anything in your experience as a photographer or, in your experience kind of testing out different types of photography that have really helped you improve your photography skills that maybe a student could keep in mind as, say, grow as their campus kitchen photographer?
Definitely. I weirdly would suggest studying paintings, like a lot of weird Renaissance paintings. Before food was photographed, it was drawn, and studying like how the light and the shadows work, and kind of how they're composing things and laying out. Other things to look at is the name escapes me, but I'm sure you can Google it. There was a photo series done about prisoners' last meals, and this is like if they were on death row, and a photographer recreated photographs of just what people were going to eat before they were executed, and that told a very bizarre and strange story. And you've never been so afraid of just a plate of just spaghetti until you saw like who requested that.
Interesting. That's great. I think both of those are great pieces of advice, and probably two things. One, at least me, I would never think to study paintings or to study that series of photographs. Wonderful. I'm going to open it up one more time to those on the phone and on their computers. Any final questions for our guest speaker, Paul? Okay. Well, thank you so much, Paul, for joining us. I don't know if you have any other pieces of advice or any final pieces of wisdom that you'd like to share. But we're really grateful to have you today.
Based on what your mission is and everything that you guys are up to, I think definitely telling the story is a huge part of it. So definitely don't discount the process of everything. I like the idea of showing the ingredients. Just to not think about just the final dish shot. Like if you photograph everything up into a point, I think it would definitely help kind of convey the message and kind of your personal mission.
Wonderful. Thank you. Great. For those of you on the line, thank you for joining us. I have been recording this session, hopefully, as I transition it into a file. It will save correctly, and if so, I will go ahead and upload it on the Campus Kitchen Center for everyone to view and listen to. But Paul, thank you again so much. Hopefully we can continue speaking with you on a regular basis and having you back on maybe later on for a little bit more of a deeper dive into photography and how to tell visual stories through photographs. I think as we tell our clients' stories and as we tell our student leaders' stories, we want to make sure we're capturing photos that are not just visually appealing, but that are impactful and do tell the story of the great work that is going on across our network. So thank you for sharing your insight this afternoon. And I think I had one more question to finish off with for you, and that was, what is your favorite food to photograph and why?
My favorite food to photograph is probably going to be sushi. It was meant to be photographed. It's supposed to be small pieces of art. The colors are always amazing and beautiful and so bite-sized. It's funny that you asked that. Yeah, I'm gonna stick with sushi specifically. That kind of, not just Japanese food, but just like sushi.
Awesome. Cool. Very cool. Well, thank you so much, Paul. Thank you all for joining. I hope everyone has a great rest of their week. And if you do have any follow-up questions after this call, feel free to send them on to me or your alumni advisor or your regional program specialist, and we will forward them on to Paul and see if he can offer any responses.
Yeah,
awesome. Thanks, everyone. Have a good one.
All right, thank you.